I stood there for a long time, feeling the night pressing in on me, every shadow suddenly looking like something watching, waiting. Mom Nkechi's words echoed in my mind, "Those who try don't last long." As I made my way back to the house, I felt like every step took me deeper into something I couldn't escape. I didn't sleep that night. I kept expecting to hear another knock on my door or see Pastor Kola's shadow lurking outside my window. But the house stayed quiet, like it was holding its breath. The next day, word had spread. People were whispering when I walked by, their eyes full of suspicion. My cousin James pulled me aside, looking worried. "Daniel, what's gotten into you?" he asked. "People are saying you've lost your mind, accusing the pastor of things that don't even make sense." "James, I saw him," I said, desperation in my voice. "I know what I saw. There was something wrong, something dark." But James just shook his head, looking at me like I was a stranger. "You need to stop this," he said firmly. "Or you're going to bring trouble on yourself. Pastor Kola, he's respected. People believe in him. If you keep talking like this, they'll think you're possessed." I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I saw that look in his eyes, the same look the others had given me. He didn't believe me. Over the next few days, things got worse. I'd see people staring at me, some muttering prayers under their breath as I passed, like I was cursed. I heard rumors that Pastor Kola had called for a village meeting, urging everyone to pray for Daniel's soul. Then, one evening, I came home to find a small clay bowl outside my door. It was filled with strange herbs and a red, sticky substance I didn't recognize. I didn't dare touch it. I just stared at it, feeling a cold fear creeping over me. The next morning, the same bowl was outside again, this time, with a note. It was written in simple, messy handwriting, "Leave, or the spirits will take you." I could barely breathe as I read it. I knew I was being warned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would mean running from something much darker. That night, I felt a presence outside my window. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, feeling something heavy in the air, a darkness pressing in. I heard whispers, low and muffled, like a distant chant. I couldn't understand the words, but they sent a chill down my spine. And then, through the thin curtains, I saw it, a faint glow, like the light of a candle. It moved slowly past the window, lingering just long enough that I knew someone was out there. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, heart pounding. But before I could even unlock it, the light disappeared, and the night went silent. I didn't sleep for a second after that, every creak of the house filling me with dread. In the morning, I went to see Mom Nkechi. She opened the door before I even knocked, her eyes dark and knowing. Without a word, she led me inside and sat me down. "What did you see last night?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I told her everything, the bowl, the note, the light outside my window. She listened, her face unreadable, but I saw a flicker of worry in her eyes. "You've seen too much," she finally said. "Pastor Kola's powers, they are not from the God he claims to serve. He draws his strength from dark places, and anyone who threatens that is a danger to him." "Then what do I do?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How do I stop him?" She looked at me, her gaze heavy. "You can't stop him. Not alone. But there are ways to protect yourself. Ways to stay hidden from his sight." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into my hands. "Keep this close," she said. "And whatever happens, don't speak of this to anyone else. Trust no one." I wanted to ask her more, but she shook her head, standing up. "Go now, before anyone sees you here," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. I slipped the pouch into my pocket and left, feeling her warning settle deep into my bones. For the next few days, I kept my head down, avoiding everyone, staying close to home. But every night, the light returned, moving past my window, flickering like a ghostly reminder that he was watching. And then, one night, the light stopped. It lingered outside, and I heard his voice, low, chanting, just like I'd heard by the shed. I froze, lying perfectly still, my ears straining to catch every word. The chanting was muffled, but I could make out a few phrases. It wasn't English, and it definitely wasn't Yoruba or any language I recognized. It was something darker, older, like a language that didn't belong in this world. The words got louder, sharper, each one feeling like it was pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I clutched the pouch Mama Nkechi had given me, feeling its rough edges bite into my palm, grounding me. And then, suddenly, the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was thick, unnatural, like the whole world had gone quiet. Daniel, his voice drifted through the window, soft, almost mocking. You can't hide from me forever. I didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I felt his presence outside, lingering like a shadow. The seconds stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Finally, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. When morning finally came, I felt drained, as if his words had sucked the life out of me. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. If I didn't do something, he would get to me, one way or another. I decided to visit Mama Nkechi again. I needed answers, or at least some kind of plan. When I got to her house, she was already waiting at the door, as if she'd known I was coming. Without a word, she led me inside, her face grave. She sat me down and lit a candle, the flame flickering, casting long shadows on the walls. He knows you're not afraid anymore, she said, her voice low. That's why he's coming after you. People like him, they feed on fear, on power. But when someone sees through them, it threatens everything they've built. Then what do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. There's only one way to confront him, Daniel. You have to go back to that place. The shed. And you have to bring this with you. She handed me a small, carved stone, its surface rough and covered in strange symbols. I took it, feeling its weight in my hand. What is this? It's protection, she said. An old charm, passed down through generations. It will guard you from the darkness he calls on, but only if you stay strong. You'll have one chance, and you must use it wisely. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination building in my chest. That night, I waited until the village was quiet, until every light was out, and then I made my way to the shed. The night was cold, the air heavy with a silence that felt wrong. When I reached the clearing, the shed loomed in front of me, its wooden walls cracked and weathered, the ground around it scattered with strange symbols drawn in the dirt. I took a deep breath, clutching the stone in my hand, and stepped inside. The air was thick, almost suffocating. In the center of the room, the black pot sat on the floor, just as I'd seen it before. Ashes and remnants of burned herbs surrounded it, the smell still strong. And then, in the corner, I saw him. Pastor Kola was standing there, his back turned, his figure shrouded in shadow. As I stepped forward, he turned, a twisted smile on his face, his eyes gleaming with a dark, unnatural light. So, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. You came back. Foolish boy. I held up the stone, my hand trembling but steady. I'm not afraid of you, I said, forcing the words out. He laughed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to echo in the tiny shed. You should be, he whispered, his voice laced with something sinister. He took a step forward, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me, like his very presence was sucking the warmth out of the air. But I held my ground, focusing on the stone in my hand, feeling its rough edges biting into my skin. Mama Nkechi's words echoed in my mind, stay strong. You'll have one chance. He raised his hand, muttering something under his breath, and the air grew even colder, shadows twisting around him, moving as if they were alive. But the stone in my hand grew warm, its heat spreading through my arm, filling me with a strength I didn't know I had. I took a step forward, holding the stone out in front of me. Your power doesn't come from God, I said, my voice steady. And it won't protect you here. His face twisted, a flicker of fear crossing his eyes. For the first time, he looked unsure, his hand lowering slightly, his chant faltering. Leave this village, I said, feeling the words pour out of me, strong and certain. Leave and never come back, or you'll face the same darkness you've been hiding behind. For a moment, he stood there, his face contorted in rage. But then, slowly, he backed away, his eyes never leaving the stone in my hand. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night, his figure swallowed by the shadows. When I looked down, the stone was still warm, its glow fading slowly, leaving me standing alone in the shed, the silence settling around me like a weight lifted. The following Sunday, I went to church, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I hadn't seen or heard from Pastor Kola since that night in the shed, but something told me it wasn't over. The congregation was buzzing as usual, eager for another miracle service. As I slipped into a seat in the back, I caught sight of him standing at the front, his face calm, his voice smooth as he greeted people, the same way he always did. But as the service went on, something strange happened. A young woman named Busy, a regular at the church, came forward for prayer. She'd been having leg pain for months, and Pastor Kola placed his hands on her, his voice rising as he commanded the spirit of pain to leave. The crowd watched eagerly, many with their hands raised, believing they were about to witness yet another miracle. Just as he began to heal her, Mom Nkechi stepped forward from the crowd. She held up a small bottle and, with her voice steady, said, "Pastor, what about the oil you hide under your robe?" The room went silent. Pastor Kola froze, his confident demeanor slipping just slightly. A few people turned to look at her, confused, murmuring among themselves. But Mom Nkechi wasn't done. She raised her voice, addressing the whole church. "He's been using charms," she said. "I've seen them myself. He uses oil mixed with roots and powders to trick us." Pastor Kola laughed nervously, trying to brush her off. "Mom Nkechi, please, this is God's work. There's no need for such accusations." But she stepped closer, her gaze fixed on him. "If it's God's work, then take off your robe. Show us there's nothing hidden." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Pastor Kola hesitated, his face going pale as the people he'd once controlled so easily began to question him. A few of the men moved forward, insisting he prove his innocence. Finally, under their watchful eyes, he reluctantly took off his robe. Underneath, tied around his waist, was a belt made of strange symbols and roots, small bottles dangling from it, filled with a thick, oily liquid. The crowd gasped, some stepping back in shock, others staring at him in horror. One of the elders stepped forward, his voice hard. "So, this is your power, Pastor," he said, his words dripping with disgust. In that moment, the mask slipped entirely. Pastor Kola's face twisted with anger, his usual calm shattered. "You fools," he hissed. "You think miracles come without sacrifice. I gave you all what you wanted, healing, blessings. And this is how you repay me." The congregation was stunned, some people clutching each other, others looking at him with a mix of anger and fear. His outburst had done what years of whispers and suspicions couldn't. He'd shown his true self. Without another word, he stormed out of the church, leaving behind the stunned congregation, his secrets finally laid bare. That was the last anyone saw of Pastor Kola in the village. From that day on, people spoke of him only in hushed tones, as if he were a ghost or a bad omen. But in the end, his own greed and pride had been his downfall, and the village was finally free from his dark influence. Thanks for watching, hope you learned something from it. Kindly subscribe and turn the notification bell on, to be among the first to get new videos.